this session particularly um, is the gist and crunch of what I've actually been doing for the last 25 plus years in terms of how security has actually come across. And these are usable slides and information that you can actually use either discussions with your partners, you can use that discussions with your customers. So the intent for this session is to actually share and impart as much information that I can squeeze in within 1 hour. Typically, when we talk about, as you're aware, when we talk about Azure security best practices, it is primarily, can take days when we talk about, all the different areas, services, and appliances that actually exist within Azure. But again, my intent is to cover as quickly as possible in best possible way. Um, just going back, my contact details are here, just in case if anyone wants to reach out and discuss further. I'm happy to help. Um, so I'll start with when we talk about the security best practices. I'll start with the journey that sort of begins with. Supposedly, we actually get a customer contact, or we're actually a partner organization who are in touch with Microsoft, or multi-cloud environment, and we start with our conversations with the stakeholder. The way we actually start a conversation with the stakeholder is to try and identify and help them with understanding of why do we actually need to incorporate the security best practices from a Microsoft standpoint. So the typical schedule and the typical stakeholders, I have put them articulated in two different sections, as you can see. So uh, as you can see, so the executive summary plus goals and strategies. First of all, we want to cover the Azure security basics. Now, this again, as you can see, best practices and design decisions. Security center, which is again, that's an optional thing, which is different of cloud in terms of setting up those demos. And typical stakeholders. Sorry, Narsima, can I request if we can mute, if someone is actually unmuted in error or by mistake?
Yeah, let me check.
Thank you, please. Thanks. Um, so typical stakeholder conversations, again, leadership kickoff and closeout. So normally we have discussions with the CISOs, or we actually speak to our other stakeholders who are actually going to make business decisions on finances, that do we actually need to spend money on implementing the security best practices. The optional participants that normally actually come with the first conversation that we have with our customers, and um, and of course, with any technical teams, before they make a financial decision on spending money on this, is the security architects, network security engineers, endpoint engineers, anything that actually deals with GRC, for example, operational teams and business stakeholders. So the objective is to learn how to securely operate your workloads on Azure. This is how I would actually pitch this conversation to them, to any customer or even partner teams that I'm sort of working with. Um, in my previous life, in terms of my roles that I've actually done, and this is how I would actually start the conversation with them. Any questions? Please feel free to, you can raise a hand, or you can actually, I'll make sure, we'll have some time at the end to answer any questions. And just in case if I'm not able to cover them today, please feel free to reach out to the organizers, or get in touch with me directly. Um, Guidance structure. Again, when I start the conversation again with stakeholders, I discuss with them to try and understand that do they actually have any on-premises setup. If it's a hybrid, or if it's just a cloud only, they want to actually move across to the cloud journey. And again, we have some recommended best practices from Microsoft, which is a single approach. We also have available choices of several possible approaches that we can actually have. So, for example, when we talk about on-premises, if the security posture for on-premises environment we can discuss, does it actually is robust enough? As per we heard from the keynote speaker as well, that we need to understand the security posture because this is so important in the current trends of cybersecurity attacks and everything that actually goes on. So from that perspective, I think it is so important to actually have those discussions with the customer at the first instance. So when we first meet the customer, we have these discussions, or when we're even handing that over across, to to other areas, we can actually have those level of discussions. Again, hard to change in terms of difficulty or expensive to change. Uh, I'm sorry, I've just lost that. I'll just present that again. Sorry, apologies. So again, hard to change, difficult or expensive because, we come across these discussions where the customer says, oh, no, it's too difficult for us to change and this is going to be too expensive, as an ordeal to actually do any security best practices discussions. In terms of mitigation as well, like in terms of how critical and how risk adverse the application or the services that they currently are being used. I think this is where the primary focus of our guidance actually is, and these are the three primary topics or pillars that I normally have discussions with them based on Microsoft best recommended approach and also the choices that they can make. We need to make sure that we value or validate security best practices and recommendations that are important, but also that shouldn't slow down most organizations from adopting the cloud in general. Um, One of the other things that I actually hear a lot, when we talk about these discussions, is in terms of compliance. That my all my services are compliant. That's all good. So I'm secure enough. This is not the case. In our current requirements, we can actually explain to them and say that when you're compliant, that means it means a specific standard at point in time, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% secure. We security from a secure standpoint, as you can see here, it depicts here that it lowers the business risks to acceptable level by disrupting attacker return on investment. So as you can see, this is a section where it says it's compliant, but again, the level of acceptable risk, we have to be here so that we actually meet the secure. So having compliance doesn't mean that it's 100% secure. So you have to have that level of acceptable risk, which is here, and this is what we need to be we need to be having discussions and sharing that. And again, we can't be negligent of course, in the current environment, because that's really hard. Especially around around the pandemic, where everyone is working from home. Most of our employees are, most of our customers are even working from home. So we have to make sure that this is actually understood and shared across in a much more broader conversations with them. The next one that I want to cover is how, when we actually have a compliance and a secure conversation, as per my previous slide, how do we actually relate that to to a customer, or to an end user, saying that how does actually it affect from the attack services? To give you an example, for example, the attack services are. Narsima, sorry, can I request if you can help with muting one of the participants, if that's okay? Thank you.
Yeah, Avinash, I will mute all. You
Thank
can
you.
unmute yourself.
Thank you.
I
Um,
think it's okay now.
Thank you. Thanks. Uh, The attack services, are inexpensive. We need to have that discussion with the customer. We say we can actually show them that, the price range of how much it's going to cost against, attacks when the PC, in terms of, load compromise discussions, when we have how the attack infrastructure can actually be affected, and how long does it take to actually infiltrate one of the systems, and we can have those discussions with the customer. As you can see, I have, put together, or this is how it actually shows in terms of how much it's going to cost. Um, from an affiliated model, how attacks against employees and customers, as an example, like spear phishing services, compromise accounts. And again, we can go on. There are so many different ways of attack services or attack services which actually can hamper, an organization. And we need to have those detailed discussions with them. And I think this is where it's so important that when we talk about the security posture in Azure, not only from a services perspective, but again, having those best practices, they actually help with understanding that we, even with a small cost of implementing those best practices, we can actually help organization reduce any further burden for expensive remediation activities post any of these attacks. So I think this is a very important slide, and I normally go through all of this, when we actually have those level of discussions. Um, so yeah, um, common cloud adoption strategies. Again, when we have those conversations, there are normally three strategies, sort of kind of come up. That, do we want to just move to a SaaS model? Do we want to move to a PaaS model? Or we actually want to use an IaaS model, existing workloads, or we need to even have like a stem out of that is, do we need to convert the iOS and IaaS and also have the PaaS applications as well, from refactoring of applications which are existing in the on-prem or a hybrid environment? So I think this flowchart actually articulates this so well. If we talk about SaaS applications, it says an example of a hotel room. You're actually, have you're renting a space, or you're there for a particular time, and you're actually, you doing the SaaS offerings available, and you actually take them on, and you do the SaaS evaluation. For example, M365, we use, Outlook Teams, all the other different areas that actually come across with it. And again, we take on those applications and services, and we go with it straight away. Again, if we go across that, from a future investment perspective, yes, we've got all the yeses here. We do the SaaS valuation, and then we build upon, and we see, okay, these are some of the applications that we currently use. Why don't we actually incorporate them within our adoption strategy? And this is where we talk about PaaS. As an example, it says, furnished apartments. So we actually have got more furniture. We actually, these can be considered as, we beautify the apartment and all those other things, put our plants in there, all those other things. This sort of comes in as an example with our own a touch to the look and feel of how we actually use and operate within the cloud, for excuse me. And this is where that PaaS evaluation comes into the picture. When we talk about IaaS, again, we are using services, which is virtual machines, containers, all those are things that comes into the aspect of, how we actually use IaaS services. Again, private cloud is kind of owning a private house and all together. So I think we need to understand what the journey is for the customer. We need to understand from a partner discussions perspective what they actually want, from the end user wants, and we can then tailor those solutions based on how we actually base those discussions. And this is where all the different best practices that we follow actually fall under these different pillars, and we can have those discussions instead of having like all different discussions in one go. This actually helps that we are targeting and helping the customer with what they want, not what we want to offer. So I think having that level of discussion is so important to winning over those customers and winning over those discussions that we actually need to do. Again, we Stemming on from there, when we actually talk about the shared responsibility model, this is where it sort of helps with discussing on what exactly, as you might have seen in the past, like what exactly the cloud provider actually would actually have responsibility in key strategies. So as you can see, as in how we actually move from an on-prem to a more of a SaaS model to a PaaS model in IaaS, as an example, um, as per the shared responsibility model, more of the onus actually comes to the cloud provider then it actually to the customer. So in on-premises, everything is owned and is responsible it is responsible and strategies are supposed to be maintained by the customer. But as we move along the journey, as you can see from from the areas that are actually controlled by a cloud provider, and again, this is generic in a hybrid cloud environment. If I may say, as an example. But again, referencing Microsoft here, we've got all these different services that actually are owned and managed by the cloud provider. Again, we need to trust them, but we also need to verify, to be honest. This is where compliance and secure sort of comes into the picture. We here, for example, we're modernizing the infrastructure securely. We need to make sure, because we've got the identities and directories infrastructure, which is partly managed again in a hybrid model. Applications are completely based in clouds. Network controls, operating systems, they're all based in clouds in a SaaS model, as an example. And these are some of the areas that we need to have a better understanding of when we have those conversations. Establish a modern perimeter. Again, this is so important, making sure that the customer understands that what exactly is their responsibility. Information and data, for example, they own the data. We from a cloud provider, they need to understand that or have that level of vision that if their data is completely secure, Microsoft does not own their data, and we have specific guidelines that we actually comply with, from an industry standard, where all of the devices, information, and data is being managed and controlled by the customer itself. So that's something we need to have those level of discussions with them. Again, when we transfer to the cloud, again, this is again getting into more granularity. But some of the areas that we need to understand from a cyber risk perspective is, as you can see, from a DDoS or a denial of service perspective, we need to have that level of conversation that some of the features configuration are still need to be managed by the customer. And the reason why we actually mention that here is because they need to enable those services. For example, just running a VM or running a service in the cloud does not make everything secure. They need to have those particular protocols and guidelines and recommendations in place. For example, when you use Microsoft, Azure, or any of our our Microsoft services in the cloud, uh, we have recommendations from a secure score perspective, which we share with the customer, or even on the portal, for an enterprise portal, where you can actually manage your billing, we can manage your subscriptions, which I'll go through in details, how you can actually avoid misconfigurations. For example, I'll give you an example. For example, if a customer sets up a VM in the cloud and they open up, the ports for remote log on, that is open to attack. So this is where we need to make sure that we recommend some of the recommendations which actually come across as part of secure score, that they need to be very particular on the number of ports, or the ports that are actually open for remote access. So, and again, that's just one of the examples that came to my mind on, how that can be avoided. And again, these are, from IaaS and PaaS services, how the shared responsibility actually happens from cloud perspective. Um, any questions so far? Happy to take any questions. No problems. Thank you. I'll carry on. Um, Again, from past perspective, security patches, I think this is one of the things that I'll actually cover later as well. Um, Setting up a VM, we need to make sure that it's regularly patched. I think, we have seen in many instances, across environments and across our discussions in the past, with customers and partners alike, that when some of the services are actually set up, even in on-premises, we on-premise environment, we have seen customers running Windows servers 2008, 2000, or even older versions, and 2003 as an example. And they normally try and update or move across to the new services when one of the partner teams or a support team get in touch with them saying that it's actually almost end of life of the tenure of that server, so you need to upgrade or move to the new versions. And what it actually does is actually opens up the vulnerabilities, and it actually it's like playground for the attackers. And sometimes customers are very novice and they do not understand the security implications that actually happen. And we want to make sure that when we have those conversations, we explain them what security patches do and how they actually make security so important, in terms of upgrades, as we were talking about. VM container securities. This is so important. And again, these level of discussions should always be there, and these are part of the best practices that Microsoft recommends. Um, Again, I am running, few different areas from how those conversations, as we started with the high level stakeholders. Now I'm actually getting into the employee access management as an example. So I'm planning this journey with these slides for you all so that you can have within that 1 hour a complete discussion of security from not only from a CISO perspective but also from an enterprise admin. And you can use these slides so that they will actually help you with the discussions from the top or a stakeholder in the organization to the administrator or even the user who's actually from the hierarchy perspective, and you can have these discussions with them as and how you feel comfortable. So from an employee access management, again, um, uh, from just-in-time access, administrative privileges plus just enough access through RBAC. These are some of the services or features that are actually available out of the box. That means that when a customer takes up an Azure Active Directory, any of those premium services, for example, if the customer is on a P1 or a P2 plan, these services actually come across as part of robust security best practices from Microsoft. And even if they're actually a small business customer, they may be an enterprise customer, they can leverage all these features that actually come out of the box for to secure the environment. Because employee access management is so important, because all the employee data, PII information, is stored there, and we need to make sure that these are actually secure. Multi-factor authentication, for all administration, for example, access requests are audited, logged, and reviewed. Again, just enabling those logging features, this sort of helps us. We just toggling the button on, and we can just tell them this is how easy it is to actually implement these changes. And again, these sort of helps with granting the least privilege required to complete the task. Again, privilege access, as you can see with the just-in-time role-based access, it sort of helps. Just got a message from Jagnesh. She can't actually see the slides. I hope everyone else can see the slides, or is it? Please let me know if you guys are having problems with looking at the slides. I can present them again. Okay. Okay. Jagnesh, may I request if you want to just maybe drop and then join back again? Hopefully that may help. And Narsima, I'll share the slide deck, for you to sort of socialize that later. That's okay.
Yeah, yes, we will be sharing the slides later after the event.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. No problems. Thank you. Um, so so again, the leadership, for example, temporary privileges, these are managed by the admins. They want to make sure that who's actually requiring access for different roles that actually exist within organizations. As an example, they will all go through in terms of how pre-screened, apologies, admin request access. These are predefined baked roles within access management. That means that you can actually pick and choose out of all the roles when you log on to the Azure portal, and you can select those different roles. For example, if it's a contributor role, if it's a reader role, and you can actually apply that. And there are a lot of roles available, and you can even customize those roles as well as in how you feel comfortable. Again, from a compliance perspective, when we have conversations with our stakeholders, they ask that, okay, I want to implement security best practices, but when you talk about best practices, are they actually even compliant globally? Like, what if there is an audit done on my organization and say, this is going to cost this much amount to actually give you that level of audit trail and give you that
Yes.
compliance score. So these are some of the conversations that, to be honest, are so important with customers and even with end users. And to give an example, this is again the compliance coverage extends across industries and geographies. I have articulated this, so you're more than welcome to actually use this. As an example, for your discussions that actually would help. And you can say that these are some of the industries, and again, these are not all, because these much I can actually fit within the
Like,
within the slide. But
no,
sorry, I'm sorry,
uh,
someone has a question.
uh, uh,
Yeah, Avinash, I muted the
No problems.
attendee.
All
Sorry
good.
for that.
That's all right. um so again, even we've got regional presences. We've got regional areas which sort of covers all the different areas globally. So again, this is a very important slide to have discussions with the CISOs. We can have discussions with the admins. We can have discussions with the with the CTOs and CIOs. I think they'll be very happy to see all of this compliance coverage that we have globally. Moving across, the first question that actually comes in the picture. Okay, I want to implement the security best practices. Now, how should I do it? And now, this is where those conversations come into the picture. So this is where I get into the nitty gritty. Now I have pitched the security best practices, and they are on board. Everyone is on board. They wanted to set up a first session, but it needs to be a technical session. So we've got all the security architects in the room. How do we have those discussions? So the way we actually plan those discussions is discussing on the challenges and how we want to cover the Microsoft approach as well. So let me go through in deep with you on this. Again, this is a very busy slide, but I'll try and cover in detail. For example, so the challenges that we normally come across is the experience and tool set. So customer sort of comes up and say, look, I've got 3 admins who actually look after, or maybe 10 admins who look after my on-premises environment. We've got 500 employees. We have limited experience on cloud. We don't know how cloud operates. How do I actually make sure that it's actually secure? We have an architecture that's set up. How do we scale that across to the cloud? Critical risks, how do I manage the security implications? If someone is working from home, how should I give them access? How should I revoke those accesses? And again, for critical workloads within the cloud, how do I securely manage them? I think this is where those challenges are so important to address from our perspective, to try and explain that how we actually manage from a Microsoft approach. The way that I articulate those discussions is that from a cross-platform and cross-cloud security capabilities, we can actually have a visibility across all your resources. So even if you're running services, for example, in on your on-prem, from a SIEM perspective, we can have Sentinel, who's actually a leader in the Magic Quadrant for SIEM. So we could actually have sensors installed on your on-prem servers, which can actually pick up all the logs from your servers and send them across to Azure to actually help with the security posture and making sure that everything is secure within your environment, even if it's on-prem. Just-in-time access, we've discussed in the previous slide. Adaptive app control, configuration hygiene, we need to make sure that, as an example, we have got all the cross-platform threat detection and threat policies in place, which we can manage that. So now when I have this conversation with the customer, or when we are having this conversation in a meeting room over a cup of coffee, we see that they actually feel on board. They come on board and they say, oh, that's good. Now that actually makes more sense if we can manage everything within the Azure platform itself. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we explain that there are some extra net features. For example, we've got the firewalls we need to set up. We need to set up the proxies. We need to have edge DLP set up, and we need to have those security discussions. We need to have a secure route between your on-prem services and Azure, for which we can use ExpressRoute, which is private connectivity for all your connections from a network standpoint, which will be more secure. So again, on-premise security, we talk about the for example, as an example here, we've got Windows Server 2016. If a customer says, okay, we're using Windows Server 2012, as an example, we tell them that this actually comes pre-baked with Windows. For example, Windows 10, you can actually use just enough admin access, Hyper-V, servers and more. We can have those level of discussions with them to modernize and leverage cloud learnings and technologies, which are part of the secure score recommendations that actually come across. So Marketplace, for example, they're using a legacy application. There may be a better integration available in Azure Marketplace. They could actually even leverage some of the connectors, with all the different integrations that are actually coming across. So that means it's much more cheaper for the customers to actually use integrations than ever before, than we were talking about, say, 10 years back. Privilege access workstations. Again, this is so important to protect against high impact attacks. Break glass accounts. These are so important. And again, these are all part of the Microsoft approach as part of our discussions that we have. There's so many services and stack options that are actually available within Microsoft. And when we have those discussions, the customer can see a variety of things that actually come across and how it actually can help them to make those decisions from a compliance manager perspective, as you can see. So yeah, these are so important discussions. Excuse me. Third-party IS, again, infrastructure, we can have those detailed discussions with them. This is, again, now we have those discussions. Now the customer says, okay, now I understand the best practices. I want to take those on board. You have discussed with me the architecture model. I'm happy with that as well. Now let's set up the enrollment. So I want to get on board. I want to set up my cloud journey. I want to start the cloud journey with you guys. How should I start? This is where this discussion comes in the picture, where we talk about the hierarchies and poles. So I have those discussions with them. Again, this is such an important slide where we talk about the enrollment hierarchy. So there are two places that normally you can actually manage your subscription, and you can manage your identities on two different portals, for example. So with the ea.azure.com, this is where you can actually manage the enrollment portal. This is primarily for billing and financial management. This is where our discussion is with the CTOs. The billing administrators, that you can actually manage the billing and financial areas separately. You don't have to go deep dive into the technical bits, because it is so important when we talk about different departments and different level of complexities, from team dynamics. The finance team or the billing team don't want to do anything with the technical bits because they are not technical. So, they want to have a separate portal where they can manage the billing and the enrollment part so that they don't have to worry about any of the other aspects technically. So, in a similar way, if they order a server, so the bill actually goes to the finance team and the server actually goes to the technical team where they actually build that server. So this is how they want to manage that within cloud as well. And I have this discussions in the past is when I explain them, I say there are two different portals you can manage. One is in the enrollment hierarchy, and I'll go in more detail and depth into this. And the other part is the portal.azure.com, where all your admins or users can actually go, and it is primarily for delegation, policy, and compliance management. So, for example, you go to ea.azure.com. You can manage the departments. You can set up the departments. Again, this is being done by the billing and the finance team. All the accounts and subscriptions are being managed here. Here, all the technical admins, architects can log in and manage the identity aspects, and they can create some management groups as well. So all resources and groups are actually common to all of them, all of these areas. And let me go into more depth. For example, this is for the EA portal. So when a finance person logs into an EA portal, or a CTO logs into the EA portal, they can actually click on the enrollment. They can manage the enrollments from here. They can turn on Azure Marketplace. So for example, if the technical architects say, yeah, we want to actually have those third party or compliance services which we can download, or actually connectors that we can download for our log legacy applications. We want to enable marketplace, so this can be enabled or turned off by the finance team, so that any untoward purchases that actually happen, just like we do at a Google store, on our mobiles or even on iPhones, we go to the App Store and we can download some paid applications or services and all those other things. In a similar way, we can actually manage those things here. So if DA, you can view the charges which are available by department admins, and they will be able to see the usage as well. If AO is enabled, which is the account owner, they'll be able to see the usage as well. So related account is saying when we open up the account tree on the top, you can actually, for example, you can move department account and subscription levels. So you can actually have a holistic view of how things are happening within your organization from a cloud perspective. And if you've got an organization that's global, right? So you want to make sure that if something is happening in Europe, by one of the departments, then it is visible if you're managing that from India. If it's a company based out of India and it's actually spanned globally, you want to manage that from a subscription level. You want to actually have an account level and department level costings, and you can have all that information in here. Again, this will actually see the login and credentials and sign out option here. Simple as we log in into an email, So this is how easy it is to operate the enrollment portal. Now we so we have set up the enrollment portal. We have set up the technical bits, and I come across the GRC aspect now. The cyber team comes into the picture. We have covered all the architects. We've covered all the CTOs. We've covered all the the top level stakeholders. We've covered the technical account holders. How do we cover the governance, risk, and compliance when the cyber team comes into the picture? So Defender for Cloud, as an example, we talk about the security center, how it sort of helps as a one-stop shop for identifying and priority security hygiene. As I was mentioning, the secure score and recommendations that actually come across, management groups, Azure policies, Azure blueprints. We have a specific website where we can actually take our GRC team to actually have a look at and help them with setting up the governance within the organization. So what I normally do is I direct them to docs.microsoft.com and take them to the governance page. It has got all the resources that they require from setting it up from scratch. and we can go through that in detail. Again, we can have a workshop based on that, like it's a 2 to 3 day workshop, depending on how long they want to actually set these up. And again, these are some of the things that really help with helping our customers understand how we can manage everything in the cloud and bringing them into confidence of how things are set up. So I think some of the best practices, again, I want to cover, and again, I'm covering very high level here because of the time constraints that we have, unfortunately. So the GRC, managed tenants, and so we've got a question. That's let me quickly have a look, please, if that's okay. So are we using a custom? So Aripuruth Nafol has actually asked a question. Are we using a custom initiative instead of Azure Security Benchmark in Defender for Cloud? That's a very good question. Thank you so much for asking that. Now, I would actually tailor that to what the customer environment looks like, to be honest. If primarily as part of best practices, we use the security benchmark in Defender for Cloud, but at the same time, I would also reflect, and I would cover that in later as well, is the CIS benchmarks, to be honest, which is the Center for Information Security, where all the information sort of gets covered on what exactly we propose and how that actually is taken by the industry in general. So it depends on the industry specific as well. But my first recommendation would be using the security benchmark in Defender for Cloud, to be honest. That's how I would actually take it. But again, this is completely customized, and we can customize that depending on the industry and how the customer wants to approach that as well. I hope that answers your question, Nofal. Okay, so thank you. So coming with the managed tenants and subscriptions. Again, just a follow-up question, so I'll just take that quickly as well. Can we pull a report with customized initiatives? Yes, absolutely, we can do that. We can do that, absolutely. We need to have some level of tweaking that needs to be done, but I'm happy to address that offline and help you if you've got anything that you require help with as well on it. So that's not a problem. But I have seen that in the past, and we can definitely do that. That's not a problem at all. So coming to the managed tenants and subscriptions, again, we have covered the helping talk about GRCs to our cyber team in general, and now we talk about how do we manage the tenants and subscriptions. So we need to make sure that any security visibility into subscriptions is so important from an enterprise perspective. For example, if we are running express routes, we are actually doing global spanning of an organization, and we need to have that visibility. And the reason why we actually talk about the managed subscriptions and tenants is because the GRC team is responsible in some ways, mostly, to make sure that that visibility is there from a compliance perspective. So that visibility is required to assess the risk and identify whether policies are being adhered to. For example, we talk about just-in-time access, right? So if an admin or if a user wants to request access to a particular application, now that application contains PII information. I'll give you an example. For example, if we talk about airlines, right? So we've got an employee who wants to access customer data. Now, and everything is in the cloud. So if that employee asks for access to that particular application, which is an application which is sitting in the cloud or even in the on-prem, and we've got a connector available for it, and they access information for the customer, then having that just-in-time access as part of the policy is so important because then it's time-stamped. That means that the administrators will be able to know that employee A has requested access to Contoso application as an example, and that complaint that contains customer information, and they requested access at this particular time. This was approved because they gave a genuine reason of why they want to access it, and the access was revoked after 30 minutes automatically. So everything is actually part of the policy. And if, for example, if the employee does not follow this policy, or they do not, if the administration does not actually issue a just-in-time access policy for that application, that means that the employee can access that customer information of thousands of their personal information, and knowingly or unknowingly could be a bad actor, and they actually sort of take away all that information, and that's again a security risk. This is where GRC is so important in terms of making sure that the visibility of risk is identified and all the policies are adhered to within an organization from a regulation and a regulatory perspective as well, just in case if they get audited after a breach, as an example. So how do we ensure that? We ensure that all the Azure environments that connect to your production environment apply the governance controls. Again, you can have a look at this. Is a very useful and fun way to actually have a look at. To discover your existing connected subscriptions, you can go to aks.ms/magic button. Managed and connected. Again, ideal configuration is for subscriptions to be centrally controlled and managed. These are recommended. Unmanaged and connected, this is high risk configuration. So we need to have policies applicable to all the three different scenarios. We need to make sure this is so important, because customer says that, okay, these are being managed by my admin team, that's fine, these are most critical or secure environments, but there are some test environments that, because they are testing and creating new applications, so why do I need to manage? If they're independent and unmanaged, for example, they're using a lab model for testing, we need to make sure that appropriate controls to production data and code is there. For example, if they're using Git repositories, we need to make sure that code is protected. That's part of the testing environment. But again, that may contain a line of code that actually contains access to the production environment. So this is so important. Again, happy to have detailed discussions in this later if needed be. Key responsibilities. I normally have these discussions that what, why, and how we actually can designate parties and groups in terms of having those discussions. And I normally cover identity policies, incident management and response. If they have a SOC in place, as an organization, we normally have discussions with saying that, okay, is I'm sorry, I missed that. So with the incident monitoring and response, again, we need to make sure that security operations team are in place and they understand the identity protection. Any IT operations security jointly is being done by server endpoint security. We need to make sure the endpoints are secure. We need to make sure they have the latest subscriptions, encryptions available. We need to make sure that they're using the latest protocols, in terms of network security. For example, firewall, we need to have NVAs in place and associate routing available. Are they using WAFs? Are they using network security groups? We need to make sure all of this is in place and everything GRC has that visibility for. Again, clear line of responsibilities. In terms of policy managements, architectures, identity, security, and standards. And again, I'll cover this in a little more detail later down the track in terms of password syncs and identity standards that needs to be compliant with. Segmentation, again, this is a good segmentation strategy on why, what, and how. This is how I actually normally term conversations with the end users or customers is, what they need to do, why they need to do, and how they can do it. I think this is just a simple way of bringing things together, of identifying not only security areas or risks, but also how they can define, segment strategies, and we can help them with developing those strategies as well. For example, enabling operations, minimizing operational friction by aligning again, every the different dynamics within teams, when we talk about organizations and how they work together is so important. Sometimes we have to make sure that not only we align with individual teams in conversations, but we also bring them together. For example, cyber team, maybe talking to an IT team, and in terms of implementing policies, and how that approach gets into from a conflict perspective, or from an implementation perspective, or from a policy perspective, standardization. We need to cover everything with them just to make sure that everything is addressed properly. Again, GRC top risks. If it's an unpatched VM plus a direct internet connection, as I said, remote access is enabled, all the ports are open. This is an open invitation to an incident. So I think having the virtual machine security updates and direct internet connectivity monitoring is so important to make sure. And all these recommendations are actually available. We can either direct the customers across to these particular links that I have as part of this presentation, and all of these are actually available in terms of just-in-time access and different of cloud discussions that we have, and different of endpoints. We can have all of those level discussions in here for RBAC permissions and everything. We have got guidance for small to medium business customers. We've got enterprise customers, and these are some of the best practices. As you can see, I've actually highlighted them. And they can make those choice in terms of how they want to actually implement those policies in here. So we've got a lot of choice available for our customers as well, at the same time as well. And also why we need to actually implement them is because attackers constantly scan public cloud IP ranges for open management ports and easy attacks that can exploit common passwords and unpatched vulnerabilities. I think that sort of summarizes on the GRC team will be like, okay, yep, that's correct. Even if some of the organizations do not have a GRC team, just to give an example, we talk to the security architects. We talk to the cyber team. If they don't have a cyber team, we talk to the IT admins. So there's always a way where we can actually implement these, or implement or discuss these security best practices, even if some of the organizations do not have the specific departments or areas that they deal with. But I wanted to bring to your kind attention, that these are some of the important best practices that you should always be having conversations about, even if some of the organizations do not have these roles. But it's important to have them implemented as part of the security best practices, as part of what they currently have within the environment. GRC security incident notification. Again, this is again incident management. A way we can actually look at, for example, how the event started, when the event was detected, when the DevOps was engaged, and all those other things. This is an incident assessment normally the SOC team sort of looks into. But again, we need to make sure that every virtual machine that we set up, we have a contact set up in that virtual machine, that if there's anything that goes wrong within that, there is a security contact that actually is available, who can actually either notify Microsoft if they need help from Microsoft to actually mitigate that risk, or they can actually do that within the environment as well. So this is a very important slide, and this I love to have these live kind of discussions with customers. In my 25 years, where we ensure that the security point of contact receives the breach notification, and this is targeted to Azure administrators directly, so that they can actually take the necessary steps to mitigate that risk. Again, this is in much more detail, as you can see. I hope this is a much more clearer slide than the previous one. Excuse me. This is a 9-step incident response process. First priority is containment and recovery, and contractual commitments for customer notifications as well. The other important thing that I want to cover as part of the best practice is the security posture improvement. As I was mentioning about the secure score in Azure Security Center, we need to make sure that we review the Azure Secure Score as part of the recommendations resulting from Azure policies and initiatives built into the Defender Cloud or Security Center in terms of how we actually implement them. And this is so important. We also need to make sure that we remediate these identified risks at the earliest. So these are just click of a button. Like the customer doesn't have to be, as long as they have an understanding of what exactly goes on within those services, they can just click a few buttons and go follow the recommendations, and they can improve the secure score. So they don't have to be gurus, IT gurus, to actually do that. They can just go through and implement that. Again, if they have any issues with implementing those suggestions, there is always a link available for documentation that actually directs the customer to a documentation page, and they can follow the documentation and have an understanding of why this needs to be implemented. For example, just-in-time access, right? If it's a part of a secure score recommendation that you need to have just-in-time access, then when the customer clicks on secure score recommendations and clicks on next, then it before it actually implements that change, there is a link for just-in-time access as an example, or to documentation, where it actually gives them the detail of what this entails and what it actually helps the customer from managing perspective as well. I was talking about CIS earlier, when Purath actually had that question about, do we have a custom initiative for security benchmark? I am part of a CIS board as well, where Microsoft is actually partnering with them. So if your organization wants to look at what the industry benchmarks are and how that actually can be implemented, you can always go to the CIS page and look at, because it actually gives an independent and consensus-driven approach, which is the Center for Internet Security. And the benchmarks are informed about Microsoft's experience and best practices, and we put them across and we share that across as part of industry practice, which if you go to the CIS page, you will find that it covers other cloud providers as well. So there are different areas of other cloud providers, how their benchmarks are, how their policies are benchmarked as well. So what benchmarks your organizations? Azure Security against external sources. This is why these benchmarks are so important. And external companies help validate and enrich the team's security strategy. You can compare your configuration to the guidance for Center for Internet Security, and you can even actually become a member if you want to. And I've got this link here, which will be shared by Nursima and the team. And again, there's a compliance check that you can go through as well. So this is so important when you're having conversations with customers or even within your organization. You can actually have you can bring this up and you can say, this is what Microsoft does, and this is how an independent benchmark authority like CIS can actually help our organization become better. I think this is a very good conversation to have. And again, what are these CIS benchmarks? These are consensus-based best practices, over 100 benchmarks covering 14 technology groups. For example, ensure multi-factor authentication is enabled. For example, ensure SSH is restricted. Ensure data risks are encrypted. So this is actually like a CIS benchmark, formulation that actually helps with making those available. Again, what's inside a CIS benchmark? It actually defines what that benchmark actually applies to, what to do, and how to do it, and how you can audit that as well and how to fix. So it's got all the details that you want to go through. It's again, it's the partnership with Microsoft as well in where we actually sort of help with helping independent industries to actually have those benchmarks in place and how we actually provide our recommendations, best practices in there. As an example, so this is one of the controls as an example, for identity and access management, setting up appropriate IAM policies. Control count is 23 as an example. So this is I just want to show you that you can go through all the summary of the controls available, and you can see how many you've actually implemented within your organization, and you can share this report, with your customers or partners, or even within your organizations, how you want to sort of take it forward. I want to cover very briefly on the first big challenge of every SOC. The concerns that we have is the detect and respond. These are the two big challenges that I normally have conversations. Now, we have covered most part of the organization still now, like in terms of this session. I want to cover a little more in depth on. We've covered the GRC aspect of it, but I want to cover the SOC aspect. If an organization has a SOC, or if they intend to have a SOC, or they want to take a third-party SOC for their for the services, what challenges do they actually have is the detect and the response. So concern is missing real detections. The first conversation I ever have with the SOC analyst or even with the CISO is, look, we understand, they're like Sentinel is a world leader, but again, I'm concerned with if we're going to miss any real detections while chasing false positives, because that's going to be waste of time for all of my threat hunters and all the team that actually is part of the SOC. And we've spent so much money building up a SOC. So the other concern is that the attackers operate freely until remediated. So the way we actually kind of respond is we've got billions of events plus per month that we sort of cover or address as part of the machine learning, as part of the behavior analytics. We enforce all of these true positives and alert feedbacks, and that's why we are the world leader, in terms of what we actually do as part of our SOC approach. So they can rest assured that everything is covered and everything is in place. We can enable everything as part of the UEBA, which is part of the SIEM, SIEM and the SOC capabilities that comes with Sentinel, and and this is all covered as part of implementing Sentinel if they want to. Again, focus on time, technology, and remediate. So they don't have to worry about false positives. Everything should be covered. And that's part of the SOC capabilities that I was just mentioning about earlier. Again, this is we're coming to the end of the session, but this is one of the last, or the second last slides that I want to sort of cover in a nutshell is the security operations journey to the cloud analytics. Now, the cloud analytics is a very fancy term when it actually comes to when we talk about discussions. But again, the cloud native architecture, which is the security analytics and storage, which we use as native cloud services. We talk about Kubernetes. We talk about clusters. We talk about containers. We can talk about side by side architecture. We can say that when you talk about your journey to the cloud in a nutshell, and we'd want to summarize, is we want to understand when and why you want to actually do the integration with the cloud is so important. And again, this is by enabling the security analytics and the SIEM that actually comes with, that actually helps strengthening your security operations and your journey to the cloud. And that's going to help with securing your environment. So I hope I have we've gone a little bit above 10 minutes, but I hope you have enjoyed the session, and I hope that you'll find this useful information when you have these discussions internally within your organization or even with your customers, whatever your role is. I wish you all the best, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Anis. We shall have another 5 minutes for questions. Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and raise your questions if you have. Earlier in the chat, we had a question: can we pull a report with the custom initiative to showcase the complaints to auditors?
Yes, Noshma, thank you for bringing that across, and I have covered that
Okay.
question. But as I was mentioning to our reports, that happy to have that discussion offline because that's going to be an intensive discussion on if we need to customize that. We can do that, of course, absolutely.
Okay. And do we have specific compliance standards for India that is also covered?
Yes, we've covered
Okay.
that as we're mentioning about the CIS standards as well. So we have covered that as part of the session as well
Yeah.
for independent
Okay.
assessments.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Anas.
Thank you
Uh,
all.
Thanks for your great session. And we have your email ID. So attend, it is in the slides itself. So attendees will be contacting you in case if they have any questions or suggestions from you.
No problems at all. Thank you again, everyone, and have a lovely
Thank you.
day.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye, Anas. Yeah, guys, for the next session, we have Joe, but the speaker is unable to join the session today. So he has provided the recording. I will be sharing the recording now. Rohit, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello, what about the quiz session?
Yeah, quiz will be at the end only, at the end of the event. It is 10:30 p.m. to 10:45 p.m. The questions for the quiz, the questions will be all the session related questions will be asked together during the quiz.
So, do we have to move on to the quiz session or we have to wait here itself?
No, for quiz session will be at the end of the event, total event. That is 10 p.m. today, tonight it will be, not
Okay,
now.
okay, okay.
Nasima, I think we have to stop the recording and we need to start it again.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.